This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 80. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 80 of the Building Automation Monthly Podcast. In this episode, we will be continuing what we started in episode 79. Now, for those of you who haven't heard episode 79, in episode 79, I talked through how you can move into the world of building automation systems. And in this episode, we're going to take a slightly different perspective. We are going to look at how you can build a building automation team, because this is a topic that I really can't think of anywhere I've seen this taught. I haven't seen really anyone talking about this, yet I know that there are a ton of people who are always asking me, how can I build a building automation team? Whether that's, to operate a facility, whether that's to work for a mechanical contractor, doesn't really matter. I mean, most of the concepts are going to be the same. So in this episode, we're going to dive into a lot of stuff. And here's what we're going to cover. We're going to work through the two main types of building automation systems work that you can do. We're going to look at that. We're going to talk through how to organize a project-focused team. We're going to look at whether or not you should have an in-house building automation system group or an external group that you should just use, basically using subcontractors to perform planned maintenance. We'll talk about what the future holds for building automation teams and the skills you should look at hiring for right now. We're going to talk about the cloud and IoT and how exactly they tie into BAS and your business ultimately. And then we're going to kind of close out with why you should be shifting your business to a residual income model. And we'll talk through what that means and what exactly that looks like, because yeah, it's easy to say residual income, but what does that even look like? And we'll talk through that. So in the world of building automation systems, there's really two kinds of work you can do. I mean, there's many subsets of these kinds of work, but they really boil down to two kinds of work, and that's installation work and service work. And I'm going to take a second. I'm going to talk through each one of them because I realize a lot of folks who have worked service their entire lives aren't very familiar with install, and a lot of folks who have worked install their entire lives aren't very familiar with service. So what does install look like? Well, what install looks like is that is where you are installing a building automation system. I mean, yeah, it's like pretty basic, right? You're installing. But what do I mean by that? Well, typically this is part of a contracted project. And what I mean is that you are brought on by a contractor. Maybe that's a mechanical contractor, maybe that's a general contractor, but you're brought on by a contractor, and you're brought on as a contractor. And what that means is that you are not permanently employed by the site you're installing controls. You are actually just responsible for executing a specific set of tasks and then supporting those tasks through a warranty period, and then you're done. Now, what this would look like would be going and installing a building automation system on a new floor or in a new building, or maybe for a new set of systems, maybe a new chiller, new air handler. And this is where you would go and you would bid the work, you would submit your proposal, you would get selected, you would then design the work and submit that design for approval. That design gets approved, and then you would execute that design. You would install, you would program, and you would commission, which means you would go and check out what you've done and you would make sure it works. And then you would support what you've done through the warranty process. You would go and make sure that what you did works for a certain amount of time. Now, when I say that, I don't mean it like, oh, you just want to get through, because there's actually a lot of people who are like, if I could just get through the year of warranty, I'm good. No, you shouldn't look at things that way, because ultimately this is your name. This is your brand every time you install something. So that, in a nutshell, is installation. Now, on the flip side of things, you have what are called service teams or O&M teams, operations and maintenance teams. But the concept remains the same no matter what you call them. You're maintaining an existing installation. So a building automation system gets installed and then someone takes over maintaining it. This means making sure that the set points are right, making sure it's scheduled, doing preventative maintenance on the different building automation systems, keeping them patched, up to date, and secure. There's a variety of different things that fall into that operations and maintenance bucket. And really, what you need to focus on there is just understanding the process of operating and maintaining a building automation system. So, how do you organize, going back to this installation, how do you organize a project focused BAS team? Now, I went through it at a very high level, so let's dive into it just a little bit deeper and kind of understand which roles are involved during which parts of a project, of an installation. So it all starts off when a salesperson gets a lead, and a lead is like saying, hey, there's this opportunity to do something. And maybe that lead is a phone call. Maybe that leads from a lead reporting service, or maybe it's from an existing relationship with a customer. It doesn't really matter. All that matters is that you're going and you're processing this lead. And then you're qualifying this lead. You're making sure that this lead is actually something that you can execute and win. So, can you go and actually install, for example, if it said you need to install ABC controls, but you don't rep ABC controls, then that's obviously not a viable lead. So that's kind of the first step, is just making sure the viability of the opportunity. But once you've done that, then you need to go and quote it. Now, this is where the things start to kind of splinter off. You have kind of two perspectives. You have one perspective, which is that the salesperson also can quote the work. They have expertise around building automation systems so that they understand what a building automation system is, how to design it, what parts you need, what pieces you need, how much labor it takes, all that jazz. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought is kind of segmentation of duties, where the building automation system salesperson brings in the lead, but a sales engineer or an inside salesperson, that's someone who doesn't go and work with customers. They work through a salesperson to create quotes, to create designs. Now, don't confuse a pre-sales design with a submittal design. Those are two totally different things, and it'll make sense in a second. But a pre-sales design, the purpose of that is to make sure that you are meeting the intent of the specification and the intent of the mechanical plans and the intent of the scope of work. Once you've done that, you submit your bid, right? Your bid gets selected, and this could be based on low price, this could be based on best value, this could be based on design, this could be based on whether you're flat spec. I mean, there's so many variables, and we're not going to unpack them all here. But your project gets selected, and it gets approved, you get a purchase order, and you're well and good. This is where you do a sales to operations handoff, meaning the sales team will hand off to the operations team. And this is kind of where we get into the how is the operations team structured. Well, typically you'll have a project manager, and that person may or may not be a technical project manager. What do I mean by that? Some project managers are purely financial and project management driven. They manage the finances, they manage the project flow, but they don't ever execute anything. Then you have project managers who have technical backgrounds, and they actually go and they do a lot of the high-level coding, a lot of the high-level design, and then the low-level stuff is going to go with the folks we'll mention in a little bit. Each one of these approaches has their strength. I mean, the nice part of having a dedicated project manager is that person isn't being tied down by all the things they have to implement in the field. However, it's nice to have someone who knows how to implement because they can really understand the ramifications of choices that they make around finances, around material ship dates, around how they're going to execute, when they're going to staff, all these different variables. So for each one of those benefits, you're trading some potential cons. And you just have to realize that and make a choice as to what works best with how you fielded your team. For example, if you have a very strong design and install team, then you may be okay with having a non-technical project manager. However, if your design, install, programming team are very weak, you may want to have a more technical project manager. So you can kind of see where I'm going there. Now, I'm going to back into this. I'm not going to start with install like most people do, because when I say, hey, why don't you move into building automation systems, the natural thought for so many people is, oh, I'm going to become an installer. Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, you could do that, but there's so many other roles in building automation systems that I would argue are probably more important than installation. Yeah, everyone should understand the fundamentals of installation, but it's not that hard to pull wires and install thermostats. It just really isn't. I'm sorry if that's kind of demeaning to some folks. I don't mean it that way. It's not exactly where I rank on a scale of difficulty. I don't think of installation that way. Maybe physically it's taxing, but mentally, I mean, not so much. So when I look at forming control teams, and I've got a little bit of background in this, I've managed a $60 million P&L, that's profit and loss center, with over 120 projects running at any given time and a team of 23 plus full-time employees. So I've got a little bit of experience managing project teams. And what I saw was that by focusing on the programmers and the designers, I was able to get so much more done, and then I would shift the risk to subcontractors for install. Here's what I mean by that. My philosophy is that you have dedicated programmers, and these programmers are focused on developing the programs based on the designs. And you have designers who are designing your design submittals, and we'll do another episode on design submittals because, I mean, that's like an hour in itself just talking about that. But you've got these designers, and they develop these design submittals, and then the programmer executes it, and the installer installs it. Now, my personal philosophy is to have electrical subcontractors do the install for me. That way, all the risk falls upon them. You form a couple good relationships, and yeah, you're going to pay some markup on their cost, but they're also assuming the risk. So it kind of works well that way. And then you don't have to keep all these installers on staff if you have some downtime, because therein lies the rub. You get all these people, and then you have this lull period, and then you got to let people go, versus just always keeping everyone busy because you're running design and programming and outsourcing the install as needed. Now, with that being said, you could definitely have install in-house. Just because that's not the approach I take does not necessarily mean that that's the best approach for you. I always tell folks to challenge me. I don't say in any way, shape, or form that I have all the answers. Every situation's unique. However, this is what's worked for me over my career. Now, with that being said, you form that team, and then that team goes and executes the project. Pretty simple, right? But what about operations and maintenance teams? How do you do those? How do you form those kind of teams? What would those look like? And how do you decide if you're going to have an in-house team or an external team? Now, this is something along with the internal team that I unpack a whole heck of a lot more in my Building Automation Systems A to Z training program. But I'm going to give you kind of the summarized version right here. So when you're looking at whether you're going to execute work inside with internal teams or execute it using contractors, external teams, and we're talking about operations and maintenance here, you need to ask yourself, do you have a large enough need that maintaining a staff would be cost efficient? 2, do you have either complex enough systems that you're going to want to train folks on these systems, and maybe these are like high availability, 24/7, always got to be up, so you want to have that internal capabilities. Or on the flip side, do you not want to have that? Do you not want to have to man that? This is a decision you have to make. I can't make this decision for you. It's a financial decision for sure, but it's also an operational decision. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's imagine that you have a 24/7 facility. Each guy's going to work about 8 to 10 hours. So you're talking 3 to 4 shifts of people each day. You're talking management for each shift. So right off the bat, you could have 2 to 3 technical folks and 1 manager per shift. So you could need 9 people versus an outsourced model. You could potentially only have to deal with the technician and not have to deal with the manager. And you could have people on site that are managed by an external provider. So this is something that you just have to look at, and you have to make a decision. Does this model work for me? Now, for some of you, that may be an okay answer. For others, that answer may not be detailed enough. So here's kind of how I approach it. I look at what's the level of complexity. Is it high or low? Am I a 24/7 facility, or am I a normal 9 to 5 facility? How many buildings do I have? Are they geographically dispersed? The more complexity you're introducing means the higher cost to run an operations and maintenance team. However, it also means it's going to be a higher cost for an outsourced team. So you have to ask yourself, are you a shop that wants to have an in-house team and it's going to be a higher upfront cost but a lower long-term cost? Or are you desiring having an external team, a contracted team, a service provider team, where you can shed that cost almost instantly? It's a almost non-existent upfront cost. However, it's going to be a higher cost over the lifetime of your building because you're going to be obviously paying more for a service provider than you would be paying for in-house people. So that's something you have to decide on your own. Now, what does an in-house team look like? Typically, it's broken out in one of 2 ways. You'll either have a mixed department. That means where you have a team of a mechanic, a plumber, and a technician, and maybe an electrician, and that makes up a team. And then that team serves a shift. And that team is all part of the facility group. Or you may have what is called a kind of role-specific department breakout. You'll have the maintenance team. You'll have the mechanics team. You'll have the plumbing team. You'll have the electrical team. And that's something that is very important for you to decide. It tends to be when you have different teams, you have different budgets, and that can cause a lot of infighting, and that can slow things down substantially. The nice part of having an intermixed team with all those people on it is they're all working towards the same goal. At least if you've got good management, they're all working towards the same goal. So that's where I tend to lean towards, especially when I've managed service teams in the past. However, it once again depends on your situation as to how you build that team out. No one way is going to fit everyone, but you can figure out pretty quickly what you need. If you're seeing a lot of infighting, then you probably want to try to group people together if you can. So that's all well and good. We've got our install process laid out. We've got our operations process laid out. We know how to build our install team. We know how to build our operations team. We know how to decide whether we're going to use in-house or external providers for maintenance. The question then becomes, what does the future hold for building automation systems? What does it look like? What should you be hiring? How should you be structuring your team? How do you future-proof? There's all these different changes going on right now, and I'm going to list out 3 of kind of the macro level changes I'm seeing going on right now, and then kind of my thoughts on them. because it's still so much in flux that I can list out some generalities, but I can't give you exact step-by-step specifics because depending on where you work, what region you're in, what service provider you use, what manufacturer you use, you're going to be in a different state of maturity from a technology perspective and from an operational perspective. Here's what I mean by that. So I've seen some groups where the facility group is getting consumed by the IT group, meaning the IT group is now taking over the building automation system and they are solely using outsourced providers. They're solely using service providers. The IT is looking at building automation systems as an asset that they monitor, and then it is operated by outsourced service providers, which are held to an SLA. That's a service level agreement for uptime, for how often the system will be up. And they're looking at it just like an IT asset. I'm seeing more and more of this every day. So what does that mean? Well, if you're a service provider, it means you want to start having more IT expertise because your customer is going to become IT. So you're going to want to be able to talk their language so that you are the preferred vendor. From an operational perspective, it means you're going to want to have both IT and facilities experience. You're going to want to learn IT. That way you can be kind of a hybrid working with that IT group. And this is kind of honestly where I see the industry trending largely. This is where I think it's going to go. We saw it with when you had PBX phones and they switched to voice over IP and all the PBX guys disappeared. We saw it with pneumatics to DDC and all the pneumatics guys disappeared. We saw it with AV where they're largely moving to IP systems now. Pretty much everything's moving IP, everything's moving IT standard protocols. And this is kind of what you're going to need to know to be able to support. So I said there's three, right? So the third kind of change I'm seeing right now is where you're having a in-house team, and then that in-house team is being augmented. And when I say it's being augmented, I don't necessarily mean it's being augmented by service providers. I mean it's being augmented by technology. Now, I don't see this one catching up as much as I thought it would, but this is where you would have analytics, fault prioritization, maintenance task prioritization, and you would use technology to identify, prioritize tasks so that you could have more staff efficiency. This naturally would cause a reduction in the amount of staff you need to have, or it would at least make them more efficient. I haven't seen this catch on so much, and I think it's largely because a lot of the IT companies that do analytics, that do fault detection, they really struggle to tie into existing building automation systems because all the data types and data schemas are different. There's no structure. All the operational processes are different. And then who's going to operate this technology? These are all the challenges that come into play. However, for the progressive kind of forward-thinking facility manager or the forward-looking operational service provider manager, you could look at technology, you could look at analytics, you could look at fault detection, and you could see how can I build this into my business? How can I build this into my service offering? And add that as a value-added service, especially on new construction projects going forward. This would seem to be very valuable. I don't see it catching on once again as much as I thought it would. However, with a lot of facility managers, a lot of technicians really aging right now, they're getting old. I mean, that's just the reality. People grow up, they get old. And the field just not being replaced as fast as it needs to, I think you're going to end up seeing a need to augment with technology. And the third is more speaking to the installation teams. And this is where I'm telling folks you need to learn IT. Controls are going IP. You're getting cloud-hosted building automation systems. You're getting analytics solutions. You're getting more mobile-friendly and more context-driven user interfaces. Azure and AWS are just knocking at people's doors as far as providing hosting platforms for building automation systems. And then you've got these building automation professionals that barely understand IP addresses, that barely understand what a subnet is, that barely understand the difference between layer 2 and layer 3 topologies. And that's just networking stuff. That's not database, that's not cybersecurity, that's not applications, that's not DevOps, that's not design, that's not system integration, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's going to be really important that you just increase your IT maturity. And there's multiple ways you can go about doing that. I'll cover those in a future episode, but just realize it's really important to grow in your IT maturity. So, I kind of hinted at how cloud and IoT tie into the BAS business. I talked about how they're not really hitting their stride yet. You've seen a lot of false starts in the analytics space, in the fault detection space. A lot of this has to do with operators not being sophisticated enough to utilize this, or just simply being of the mindset that, oh, it's all that IT stuff. I don't need to learn that IT stuff. That's just Ghibli goop and da 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 da. And the thing is that, yeah, okay, that's great, but you've got, $5 million, $50 million in deferred maintenance. You can't staff up. You can't get things done. And your solution is just to keep doing what you're doing. And you're like 55 years old. You're about to retire and leave a bunch of people with a turd. And it's like, oh my goodness. That's why there is gonna be a shift. It's one of those things, if I could tell you when it was gonna happen, I would go make a bunch of investments on Wall Street, and I wouldn't be talking to you right now because I'd be on a beach somewhere sipping Mai Tais. But the reality is that it is gonna happen, and you're seeing more and more trends. You're seeing more and more maturity. You're seeing IT systems that are starting to include building automation protocols like BACnet. One of the examples of this is, I got an email on LinkedIn from this guy saying, hey, how could I tie in BACnet over IP and in the cloud? And I started to think about that. And I was like, I wonder what solutions could you really do? Because there's just not a lot out there that could be hosted in the cloud, that is. And then, I was talking with a buddy over lunch, and he was like, oh, yeah, by the way, Node-RED, which is like if then that, or if this then that. It's kind of a graphical logic builder, very similar to a lot of the graphical logic builders used for building automation. Well, essentially, he was saying, oh, by the way, it has a BACnet client and it can consume BACnet data and then feed that out via HTTP, XMPP, whatever, all these IoT protocols, right? And the real interesting thing is that you're starting to see folks in the IT side, in the IoT side, starting to blur the lines. And it's only going to take one person with the right idea and enough, domain knowledge. So that's knowledge of construction, knowledge of building automation to make this happen. And I just got this feeling in my gut. We're getting closer and closer to that. So that's kind of where things are going. Now, I debated, because I try to keep these things under 30 minutes, but we're right about there, and this is such an important topic. I'm going to still talk about it in this episode, and this is the topic of residual income. I'm a very entrepreneurial person. I always have been. I've never been satisfied with the status quo. I get very bored very easily, and one of the things that I've learned, selling books and online courses and with my income models is just how important it is to have a residual income model, because it is extremely hard to sell. It's extremely hard to acquire new customers. I think a lot of folks in the building automation space are experiencing this right now. They're realizing that in the world of building automation, it is just extremely hard to differentiate your controls product. They're all pretty much the same. It's the people who execute the project or the product that make the difference. It's having the good designer. It's having the good installer, the good programmer. It's those folks that make you worth your salt. So a lot of people they're running up against margin pressures, meaning that they're expected to make less and less profit because there's so many people in the market. The controls, they seem to look the same to so many different people. So it's like, what do I do? What do I buy? They all look the same to me. It's just buyer overwhelm. And so you're getting less and less profit on your installation projects. And this is where the residual income model comes into play. Now, what residual income is where you set up some monthly or quarterly or annually charge for a service. And what would that look like? Well, to most, the most obvious one is planned maintenance. This is where you outsource planned maintenance to a service provider, and they come and they back up your BAS. They upgrade your BAS. They do all this stuff for you. It's essentially planned service. However, if you think a little bit further, if you push yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone, you can start to think of a lot of other residual income models that you could do. For example, a lot of customers talk about how hard it is to work with IT to host their BAS. What if, for a couple grand, you hosted their BAS in an Azure or AWS cloud environment? You hosted the BAS, you oversaw the BAS, and then you help them process and prioritize things from the BAS. And then you could have this base service model where you're providing hosting of the BAS, and then you build on that hosting with other features. Maybe you tie it into an analytics suite and you do reporting. Maybe you do fault detection and you do maintenance prioritization. Maybe you do some form of residual training where every 3 months you meet and you train a customer. The options are limitless. Once you've acquired a customer, as long as you're honest, as long as you're doing a good job, as long as you are providing good quality work, then it is your duty to go and provide more services to that customer. Because if you're able to help that customer achieve their mission, maybe they're a hospital, maybe they're a data center, maybe they're a school, and you help them achieve their mission at a lower cost, then you have a duty to do that. If you're able to make their facility staff more efficient, able to help them actually be doing preventative maintenance instead of reactive maintenance because you're helping them prioritize tasking, then you should do that. And that is what this residual income model is. This is where you install your controls and then you build services around the outcomes your customers need. And the really beautiful thing is that since it's a residual, they don't need capital approval. They can go and pay through it through their operations budget. And as long as the service you're providing is 3 to 4x the value of what they're paying for it, then they can pay for it all day long. Because, for example, if they have, and I'm just going to use round numbers here, they have 10 technicians and your analytics or prioritization service that you're providing frees up 2 technicians, then you've freed up the salary of 2 technicians worth of people there. And then they can apply that cost to your services. So I know this was a little deep, and for some of you who are more on the technical side, this may have been a little high level. But the thing is that this is the business side that you really should understand. Even if you're technically oriented, even if you're a programmer, a developer, a designer, you should really understand these kind of concepts, because when you do your tasks, this is the context it's all working inside, right? This is why, when I was in the military, we would understand the context of the mission we were on, and then we would understand our role. If you don't understand the context, then you don't understand where your role really fits in. So this should help provide you that context, and it should also give you some tips if you're looking at either expanding or building or enhancing your building automation team. All right, folks, that's it for today. Everything I talked about, all the show notes, all the references, those can be found at buildingautomationmonthly.com/80. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com/80. I encourage you to subscribe to Building Automation Monthly. I'm going to be rolling out some really cool training depending on when you're listening to this. I'm going to be rolling it out to my subscribers. So I really encourage you to check that out. All right, folks, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I look forward to your comments and feedback, and I can't wait to talk to you in the next episode. Thanks a ton. Take care.